Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 672 for the 22nd of August 2021. Richard Saunders coming to you from the continuing saga, which is Lockdown Sydney, Australia. But I know a lot of the rest of the country are also in the same boat. I think of my friends in particular in the city of Melbourne. Oh, how I would love to visit you. I really would. Wouldn't that be a treat? Wouldn't that be fantastic? A nice walk through the gardens of Melbourne, looking at wattles and flowers and plants and anything, really. Or a trip to the seaside along the Surf Coast, one of the most beautiful parts of Australia. It would be so nice. But we can all dream. We can all dream, but you don't have to dream about the Skeptic Zone because it's here right now. This week's show is chock-a-block. We're going to start off with conspiracy theories. Seems to be a constant theme these days. In this case, it's 5G conspiracy theories. We look at a full-page blurb that appeared in a local newspaper in the Northern Rivers area of New South Wales, the conspiracy theory heartland. And we'll get commentary from my friend Pascual Romero from the fabulous Squaring the Strange podcast. Following that, we look at news of some of the freedom rallies, the freedom protests against the lockdowns here in Australia just yesterday, and we cross to our reporter Michelle Franklin, who is in Darwin, the city of Darwin, and saw these protests firsthand. And then, keeping with the COVID-19 and conspiracy theme, we look at some of the stranger news stories coming out of Australia in the last week with items to do with COVID-19, and we get comments from Susan Gerbeck, Adrian Hill, Leonard Trammell, Lewis Hillman and Kelly Burke. Then to round off the show, once again we look at the digital archives. In this case we look at American newspapers and YouTube for references to, more modern references to Jack the Ripper and psychics. But since this is such a bumper episode, it's time for me now to quickly run downstairs, have some crackers, because they taste good. Just dry crackers. All right, dry crackers with a little bit of cream cheese, okay? And peanut butter. And honey. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Oh, conspiracy theories, you are the gift that just keeps on. It just keeps on. If it's not vaccine-related conspiracy theories, or the one world government, or the moon landing hoax, or you name it, it's something else. And in this case, it's 5G. Now, the one thing about 5G conspiracy theories is that we know that, well, within a few years, they won't be around anymore because 5G will be ubiquitous and people will simply forget that they ever protested against 5G while they're using their 5G devices, as was the case with 4G and probably 3G before that. So I draw your attention to the Byron Shire Echo newspaper, the newspaper covering the area of the Northern Rivers, the anti-vaccination heartland of Australia. And in the pages of their 11th of August 2021 edition, which is available online, and I will link to this in the show notes, on page 15 we have a full page, I guess you'd call it advertisement, or it's not really an advertisement, or maybe it is. It's very dramatic. Right in the middle of the page, there's a picture of a smartphone, and on the smartphone is a picture of a young child with a terrible look on his or her face, cuddling a giant wasp or bee. And the wasp or bee is about 3/4 the size of the child, so that's a little bit strange. The page has been put up by 5G conspiracy theorists. At the top of the page it says, there is more to know about 5G than what we're being told in glossy ad campaigns from telcos. Telcos meaning telecommunications company. Then it lists a series of statements here. Telstra says, ... and these are statements from a telecommunications company. And on the other side of the page, it says, as in reply, community says, ... Now, of course, the community does not say this. This is the anti-5G conspiracy theorists pretending to speak for the community. So that's a bit of a red flag even at the beginning. Down the bottom of the page it says, boycott 5G phones to disable the 5G network. The website listed is www.wearenotsam.com, which takes you to a conspiracy theory-laden website. The statements, apparently from Telstra, the telecommunications company, says here in very, very, very tiny little writing near the bottom of the page, the responses from Telstra are compiled from correspondences with Northern Rivers for Safe Technology. Again, I hasten to say that probably the same people who railed against 4G and 3G and telecommunications towers in general. Now, I learnt a lot about 5G from listening to the Skeptoid podcast with Brian Dunning. There's an episode about 5G. I will link to this in this week's show notes. But also, I asked my friend Pascual Romero from the wonderful Squaring the Strange podcast and an engineer in the telecommunications industry if he could offer some insights into some of the topics mentioned in this blurb.
Thanks, Richard. So before I get started, I want to mention that 5G is a marketing term and not a specific type of technology. It stands for fifth generation, and it just describes the fifth generation technology standard of cellular data networking. The worry is mostly about the frequency spectrum used to carry this data, which is referred to as millimeter wave transmission. Millimeter waves are what the International Telecommunication Union designates as extremely high frequency, or EHF spectrum. The words extremely high frequency are bound to scare some people, but let me just tell you, they're still lower frequency than the infrared light that your TV remote uses, and significantly lower frequency than, say, the light from your desk lamp.
And this is from the blurb. Quote, show us the proof there is no evidence of harm. 2,000 plus peer-reviewed reports show biological harm from wireless radiation. www.bioinitiative.org.
First off, I want to point out that the phrase proof of no evidence is not scientific and thus isn't something we can provide. There is either evidence of harm or there is none. Versions of this argument have existed since the 80s era concerns about living near power lines. I don't have the time to go through the 2,000 plus peer-reviewed reports, but Dr. Bill Curry, a physicist, did go through a number of them in 2000, and much of the hullabaloo is actually based on his findings. He looked at studies where they applied electromagnetic radiation to various biological tissues, and he misinterpreted the results to mean that it would have an effect on cells deep within the human body. The failure was in not accounting for the protective nature of human skin. An easy mistake for a person with no experience in biology, but a mistake nonetheless. Our skin is actually quite effective in shielding us, and thanks to the physics of electromagnetic radiation, it's actually more effective at blocking higher frequencies. If you look at waves and their ability to penetrate objects, the higher you go, the harder it is for them to enter an object. One of the noted limitations of 5G is that these high-frequency waves have a tough time getting into buildings because the waves don't penetrate walls very well.
All right. Another claim is about standards designed to protect people. The blurb says, quote, there are no long-term studies that have looked at this issue, particularly when it comes to impact on kids, the elderly, and pregnant women, end quote.
The World Health Organization has studied low-level EMF for decades, and while 5G cellular communication itself is new, being exposed to these frequencies on the radio wave spectrum isn't. The shielding effect of human skin applies no matter how old or how pregnant you are.
Next we have this claim, quote, independent experts say 5G radiation could have catastrophic effects on the already endangered insect populations worldwide, which will also affect agriculture and global food supplies. We advocate for the bees, end quote.
So this bit of fear is one that we just don't really have much data for. I haven't found much proper research other than a 2018 study on the exposure of insects to radio frequency EMF from 2 to 120 gigahertz. This study doesn't necessarily claim that 5G poses a particular risk to insects. It's just observed that insects have an increased absorption rate of RF above 6 gigahertz when studied in a lab. These conditions are no doubt very different from environmental exposure. So far, there has been no cause for alarm, but the bit of good news is that millimeter wave is mostly for urban areas where a mesh of transmitters can be implemented. There's not much utility in putting these transmitters around farms or orchards because of their relatively short range. This is good news for the bees in the unlikely event that we ever do see a wide-scale issue.
There are more claims made on the blurb, which you can read via the link in this week's show notes. But I'll ask Pasquale about the statement made in big bold letters at the bottom of the page. Boycott 5G phones to disable the 5G network.
Not using 5G phones isn't going to disable the network. It's already part of the communications infrastructure of most major cities. Smart city technology is already on the network. That is things like wireless parking meters, automated parking structures, stoplights. Entire industries have already begun pivoting their worker communications devices to 5G. Even power and water companies are already utilizing it for everything from monitoring their systems to reading your house's meter remotely. This is all to say that I just don't see a situation where a boycott by some segment of the population would do much to slow the spread of 5G technology.
Thank you to Pasquale Romero from Squaring the Strange podcast. So there you go, a little look at 5G. And like I said, everybody, enjoy these conspiracy theories when it comes to 5G, because I think they're destined to fizzle out over the next few years.
Allora ciao, io mi chiamo Professore Dave, io ti voglio insegnare tutte le cose sulla scienza. Parliamo di fisica, di chimica, biologia, astronomia, matematica e tante altre cose. Guardami su YouTube, arrivederci. Hey everyone, this is Professor Dave. I want to teach you about all kinds of things regarding science. I want to tell you about physics. I want to tell you about chemistry, biology, astronomy, math, and many, many more things. Come check me out on YouTube. The channel is called Professor Dave Explains. Take it easy.
He knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave Explains.
As I record this segment of the show, it's Sunday morning here in Australia, and I'm putting this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone together, but I thought I would reflect on the events of yesterday. Yesterday, New South Wales recorded its highest ever day of new COVID-19 infections, over 800, which was a jump of over 100 from the previous day. The cases went from the 600s straight to the 800s. And as I record, I don't know what today's figures will bring. Nevertheless, yesterday, fueled, spurred on, egged on by various conspiracy theorists online, thousands of people marched through the streets of Melbourne, and this resulted in violent encounters with police, flares being thrown, police injured, and many arrests. Here too in Sydney, a much smaller group of protesters marched to the city and they were met by the long arm of the law, or the strong arm of the law. Now, of course, these protesters were a mix of people. There are some there who are truly having a terrible time, fed up, COVID-19 lockdown fatigue, and we can sympathise to an extent. But a lot of people were there because they've been, as I said, fueled on by misinformation, conspiracy theories from the internet. And these people are protesting that they need freedom and we shouldn't be locked down. And of course the fear is, if that was the case, if they had their way, then within a very short amount of time the hospital system would collapse. The morgues wouldn't be able to cope. And the very people these protesters love would be ending up in the grim statistics. Protests also were in other capital cities like Brisbane and Adelaide, and also Darwin, and we'll get to that in a moment. But getting back to Sydney and Melbourne, the scenes that we've been seeing on the TV news reports are distressing, absolutely distressing, when you consider that despite everything the government is doing here in Sydney at least, throwing everything it can, and it's debatable what they're doing is right or wrong, okay. Nevertheless, despite everything they're doing, the numbers are increasing at a horrifying rate. And since some percentage of these protesters believe the conspiracy theories to the extent that they think that COVID-19 is a hoax, many of them were not wearing masks. And it would be fair to say that many of them weren't vaccinated or will not get vaccinated. The pictures from Melbourne are particularly disheartening, and here is what they sounded like. It's also disappointing to see people I know on Facebook posting their support for the protesters and their derision of the police who were there doing their jobs, protecting the rest of us. Now, it's true to say that the vast majority of the population around Australia are doing the right thing, and being cautious, being careful. But the trouble with Delta variation of COVID-19 is it only takes a small minority of people to do the wrong thing, and we end up in the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. So it's Saturday, the 21st of August, as I speak to you. It's around about 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Sydney, but I'm hooked up to our reporter, Michelle Franklin, who is in Darwin at the moment. And Michelle, you spending time with our other reporter, Heidi Robinson, and you've just come direct from the freedom protests in Darwin. What's the scene? What's happening?
It's not what I was expecting. Heidi texted me a couple of days ago and said, hey, this is happening. Do you reckon we should do anything? And I'm like, nothing will happen. 10 people will show up and everybody will laugh at them. And I was very wrong. I reckon there'd be well over 200 people there. Mm-hmm. And they're getting very emotional and they're waving signs around and doing all the things that you see people do on TV. So, yeah, I was very surprised to see that.
I'm surprised too. And bear in mind that Darwin is not a huge place, so 200 people is a reasonable turnout for something like this. But
we have also just come out of our second ever lockdown, so it's fresh in people's minds at the moment because, we had a case last week and we went into a snap lockdown. So, COVID's at the front of everybody's minds finally.
And as we speak to each other, and you've posted some of the pictures from the protest in Darwin, I've been looking on the online news, and some of the video coming out of Melbourne is absolutely frightening, with huge numbers of people assaulting police, flares being lit and thrown, and even in Sydney there's been some arrests on the worst day here for COVID numbers. It's absolutely frightening.
Yeah, I've been watching the numbers down south. It's terrifying. I feel like it's a whole different world down there to what it is up here. Like until last week, COVID was just a thing that you see on the news. It was barely even affecting us at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we had one guy come through. I think he went to Sydney Airport and then he went to Canberra Airport and then he came up to Darwin, and they said that didn't constitute quarantine, so he was allowed out into the community. And then his test result came back positive. So we did a snap 3-day lockdown. Luckily, he didn't transmit to anybody, so that lockdown has now lifted and we're back to being just sort of on alert and waiting to see if anything's going to happen. But, yeah, I was not expecting quite the response that we saw there. It's, very...
Well,
very surreal.
I must say, I am now you've explained that situation to me. I am surprised because, okay, here in Sydney, we're 8 weeks or 9 weeks into a heavy lockdown, and today's numbers were horrifying, and new laws being brought in and curfews and all sorts of things. So people are at their wits' end, and you can. No, they shouldn't do it, but you can understand the frustration some people would have. But I'm quite surprised that people would turn out in Darwin after just a 3-day lockdown, then life back to normal.
I think because to us that feels like a big deal. And we went straight into really hard lockdown. Like we were not allowed out of our houses, but it was only 3 days. So honestly, just suck it up. It's not that bad. But I can understand people being shocked. We went from complete freedom to complete lockdown, and we had, I think, an hour's notice. Yeah. So they announced it on the news, and the laws came into effect an hour later. So it was immediate. Which I think is great. I think that's the best thing they could have done. And in this case, it's worked. And it happened a couple of months ago and it worked as well. We had a case in one of the mines here and they just immediately locked everything down. I think there were a couple of cases of transmission and then it all just went away again, which was great.
Well, look, I'm not surprised they did that because we've learnt the lesson here in Sydney, or maybe we haven't, how bad Delta is. It's absolutely a different thing. I mean, last year was bad enough. We thought, the normal COVID was bad enough. But COVID, the Delta variation seems to spread at the drop of a hat. It's really frightening.
Yeah. The other difference that we have up here is that access to vaccines is easy. I'm not sure what the difference is. Obviously, we've got a lot fewer people, so we don't need as many to get good coverage. But anybody who wants one can get one. When they announced the age drop, they dropped it down to, I think they dropped it to 18 a few months ago, and I just rang up the next day and got an appointment immediately. So I had my 2 shots months ago.
Excellent.
Just last night or 2 nights ago on the news, they announced that it's now down to 12 years old. So I called up yesterday and I've got an appointment for my 12-year-old to get her shot next week.
Great.
And, there was just no hassles at all. It was really easy. I'm just waiting for my 9-year-old now. And I don't think it'll be long before they decide that that's safe as well, and then she can have one, and then we'll be completely covered. Yeah,
that'd be good. I certainly hope that can happen. Well, look, please give my love to Heidi, who's visiting you at the moment.
Yes, unfortunately, she had to run away because this lovely winter's afternoon was a bit too warm.
Well, look, I certainly hope that Darwin never has to face what we're facing here in Sydney. So
I hope so too.
I really do.
I really hope that the new measures that they've put in down there will make a difference, because what I've been seeing on the news has just not been good. I've been very worried.
Well, it's sad to say at the moment. It's difficult. It doesn't seem to be working, but as we're told frequently, if we didn't have these measures in place, the number of infections would be counted in the thousands and the deaths in the hundreds. So
yeah.
Stay safe, Michelle. Stay safe, and thank you for this live update.
Thank you. Good luck.
G'day, this is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
Now, here's a brief roundup of a couple of stories coming our way in Australia, or from Australia, in regards to the COVID-19 outbreak here at the moment. The first story comes from the Northern Rivers region of New South Wales, this state. This is the region where our reporter Heidi Robinson is based. And this is reported in the Sydney Morning Herald newspaper online, and a story by Nick Boniadi. Security guards sent to Mullumbimby, Byron Bay post offices as customers shun masks check-ins. And it says, security guards are now manning the doors of Australia Post stores in Mullumbimby and Byron Bay after more than a third of customers refused to wear masks, use hand sanitizer, or check in. Now, just as an aside, in Australia at the moment, I don't know for the rest of the country, but in New South Wales, whenever you go to a place of business, you have to check in with a QR code, or at least leave your details. The northern New South Wales holiday region was put into a 7-day lockdown after a COVID-19 positive man visited Byron Bay, but the stay-at-home rules have been extended as part of the latest orders for all regional New South Wales. Despite the lockdown, the Communications, Electrical and Plumbing Union, which represents Australia Post staff, said more than a third of customers had not been complying with COVID virus safety rules in recent weeks, putting staff safety at risk. It's completely unacceptable, CEPU, New South Wales Secretary Shane Murphy said. Even before the pandemic, Mullumbimby was known for many of its residents' anti-vaccination sentiment and distrust of mainstream medicine. Regional Australia Post management was initially resistant to bringing in security guards, but the National Mail Service agreed after discussions with the union on Friday. We immediately escalated this issue with Australia Post management to ensure our members at Australia Post outlets have the safety and security they need, Mr. Murphy said. It's not up to staff to have to enforce the law. An Australia Post spokesman said it had introduced health and safety measures across its network since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, including check-ins when required by public health orders. We now have a security officer at our Mullumbimby and Byron Bay post offices to assist customers in understanding their public health obligations, and we ask for the community's cooperation in ensuring the health and safety of staff and customers, the spokesman said. While security guards have not been employed at other stores, Australia Post's decision underscores the challenge facing essential businesses in the retail sector, including supermarkets, as they balance staying open with health demands from staff. New South Wales Police Minister David Elliott urged retailers to put security guards on doors to enforce the use of QR codes earlier this month, citing the number of supermarkets listed as coronavirus exposure locations before backing down and emphasizing the health orders. As we've said all along, as we've said to the supermarkets this week, the health orders are clear. You've got an obligation to be reasonable when it comes to making sure people comply, Mr. Elliott said. Some supermarkets have chosen to hire security guards. Now, it's interesting to note that in my local shopping centre, not far from the studios here, when I very rarely do shopping, and it's usually late at night when there's scarcely anybody there, I'm glad to say the supermarket I use has a security, well, a staff member at least, out the front to make sure that people are wearing masks and scan in. But what a sad reflection on that area of New South Wales that so many people don't consider the health orders to be important, or they don't consider that they should comply anyway, or they simply think the virus is a hoax, or maybe they're just freedom warriors, who knows. Joining me now for this part of the roundup of COVID news this week, I have the Prediction Project crew, Adrian, Lou, Leonard, Kelly, and Susan. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Hello.
Some of it.
some of the yes, of course, Ian was helping us earlier, and we get drop-ins and other people helping us along the way. But we did our predictions today, mostly about the centre of Australia and sorts of strange things, and we were looking at events of the year 2013. And it's interesting when we look at big events that weren't predicted by psychics and we think, oh, I remember that. For example, the Pope retiring. That was rather unexpected. And oddly enough, no psychics predicted it. But nevertheless, here we are looking at COVID news, and I'd like to get your thoughts and opinions as I read this particular story, which has come to my attention. And this is by Brooke Rolfe, as written at news.com.au. Awkward shopping centre anti-vax protest ruthlessly mocked online over confusing signs. And here it is. A group of COVID protesters, they're not protesting against COVID. They're really conspiracy theorists thinking that COVID's not real, I suspect. A group of COVID protesters have been ruthlessly mocked after holding illegible signs while dressing in full PPE at their silent demonstration. And the video accompanying it's quite funny. They're all dressed like mimes, with the face thing. It says, a group of protesters demonstrating inside a shopping mall put on an awkward performance over the weekend, attracting virtually no one's attention, despite being dressed in full-body PPE. The strange display unfolded inside Lakeside Joondalup Shopping City Centre, north of Perth, on Saturday morning, with group members holding up a series of bizarre placards. Organisers, believed to be anti-vaxxers, may be disappointed in how footage of the protest has been received online via viral TikTok of the event receiving confused reactions. And I will read some of the signs in a moment. Not only were shoppers entirely unfazed by the demonstration, the placards displayed didn't make much sense. Here's what they were holding up in their silent demonstration. Trust the science was one sign. Dob on the unvaccinated was another sign. Support dividing Australians was another sign. One sign read, stay sleep. Another sign said, don't think. Video showed about a dozen group members walking slowly in unison and not saying anything. The signs were believed to be the group's take on sarcasm. However, when read plainly, some were somewhat accurate. One sign said, trust the government. And then another sign said, do not question authority. Another said, censorship is for our safety. Okay. I
like to trust the science.
Yeah, trust the science. Yeah, that's a good one. One person held a sign saying support dividing Australians, and the person behind them had one sign that said dob on the unvaccinated. Now, dob in Australian slang means to inform on. If you dob on someone, you're informing on them.
Oh. That makes sense.
Somebody else sign was reading trust the science, yes, and another sign said no independent thought. One was also holding a sign that read mask is work. They're not, okay.
It makes sense.
Support dividing Australians. Is this a plea for help for vaccine?
Yeah,
or something?
I have no
idea
idea
what that means.
It's the King's
stay asleep. Stay asleep.
Stay asleep, I think. Don't be woke, I suppose. I don't know. It's fair to say...
they feel they're woke.
They feel they're woke. It goes on to say, it's fair to say whatever the group's actual message was, it fell largely on deaf ears. Hundreds poked fun at the group's comments on TikTok with the stay sleep sign leaving many hysterical. Somebody said, I live by stay sleep and don't think anyway. It's the grammar, stay sleep. That did it for me. Another added. Many pointed out the irony in the group all wearing masks and staying socially distant.
In full PPE. Oh, that's
Yeah.
great.
Oh man. Okay, so I'll link to this in this week's show notes. But it's wow. I mean, talk
like
about
they're
what we call an own goal. You know, just they're sending themselves up, I think.
They're trying to make it like they're trying to paint this ridiculous picture, but it's actually like making all of us happier that they're keeping to themselves and keeping full PPE on.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating that they're doing exactly what they're mocking. Okay, so they're trying to be sarcastic, but
Failing.
But it's also very worrying that there are people in our society who think this is clever or funny or meaning or poignant, and they have to do some sort of protest to. What are they protesting against? Public health?
Maybe it's another layer deep, and they're pointing out the absurdity of everything by trying to be so completely unintelligible that people will try to assume that they mean something, but they don't.
I guess in one sense, though, they sort of achieved an aim. They got notoriety. I mean,
Nostradamus, people are going to be reading things into what they said. Yeah, like Leonard said.
yeah, maybe that's. I mean, we're finding out about it, so their protest didn't go completely unnoticed. But it's, I guess, it's good in a sense, but it's so bizarre and so stupid in another sense. Have there been any bizarre and weird things happening in the United States that maybe we haven't heard about here in Australia with people?
Well, not of this type.
Oh my goodness, nothing. Oh, nothing at all happens in America. We're just the most sane and
As soon as I said it, I realized what I said.
literate, and of course
We do have some things being said by governors of some of our southern states.
School board
Some of
meetings
those
are
governors-
becoming very interesting.
Really?
Some of those governors getting COVID now.
I heard that. Now, which governor has COVID?
Governor of Texas, Greg Abbott.
And that's relatively recent news?
I heard about it today.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it happened.
And now, is he noted for flouting the concern for COVID or something like
I'm
that?
sure he's vaccinated. But
Not only flouting the concern, but he's also, and not only was he vaccinated, he's also getting the Regeneron antibody treatment, despite the fact that he is asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was also one of the first to lift mask mandates. Like Texas was one of the really early states that lifted their mask mandates and was, full force going back to regular life. So it's particularly frustrating.
and
Okay.
Texas has no ICU beds.
For kids, for children.
For children,
Yeah.
yeah. They said I watched an administrator in Texas a couple days ago say, if your child needs an ICU bed, they'll have to wait until another child dies.
Wow. And this is only, we're only speaking in, as we record this, it's Wednesday morning here in Australia. It's Tuesday evening for you folks. So it's a few days yet before the Skeptic Zone goes out. And we are anticipating that things could go a bit more pear-shaped in the United States.
I don't see any way that can be avoided. If this doesn't go, as you put it, pear-shaped, it would be a spectacular surprise, a welcome one. But
Yeah.
it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, schools are starting to go back now, so it's going to get worse, especially for kids.
Oh, well.
In my part of Arizona, I noticed more people are masking again.
Good. I mean, it's extraordinary here when I venture out very rarely now if I'm doing some exercise or I have to get to the shopping center, that there's scarcely anybody there, and anybody who is there is masked up. And even walking in the streets, people are wearing masks here. So
Interesting. Here in California, almost always people are masked, and we don't have a mandate. Our rates are fairly low.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for California standards, not for other places, but people have been wearing masks even out walking their dogs when there's nobody around.
And even the dog has got a
we're being
mask.
very
It's quite
compliant,
amazing.
but it's amazing to me. The bad news is, we hear about these people on the school boards and stuff, and these mimes, whatever they are.
Yeah.
They're getting a lot of press, but I think that I'm an optimist. I think that most people are doing the right thing and being careful, and
I think you're right.
I think we're going to be able to get through this. It's going to be a few more weeks, though, but I think we're going to start seeing it. But then again, I'm an optimist, and I
No, you're right. And it just whenever I see these sort of bizarre things going on and all the protests in the streets, which we've had in the past, it's a minority. It's a tiny minority of the general population, and the general population get it and are doing the right thing. It's the minority who aren't and helping to extend the lockdowns.
Yeah, the problem is with the Delta variant, it only takes a minority to spread it to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Personal anecdote, one of my partner's sons is a non-believer and will not get or allow his family to get vaccinated.
Wow.
This is, I actually left Tucson when they came here to visit because I wouldn't be around them.
Wow. That's too bad. Anyway, that's a roundup, a little roundup of some of the strange and interesting stories that come from our current situation worldwide. So thank you, great Australian Psychic Prediction crew, and I look forward to seeing you for our session next week.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Good to see you, Richard.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'll put that on the show.
Hello, Maynard here, kicking back with a cocktail in the Bill Shatner room here at Maynard International Studios. It's a bit like International Rescue, except we don't do anything. Hang on a minute. Hang on. What's this? Hang on. I like this. That tastes good. It's called a paranormal punch because it's made with lots of spirits. Oh, come on! It's a pandemic! Anyway, you know when I get a few minutes to unwind at the end of the day, and boy do I unwind, sometimes I'm just a whole bunch of cogs on the floor, I like to visit the Bent Spoon Award page over at skeptics.com.au. Hey, we all need a hobby. Come on, look, I've got to have something to do at the end of the day. Did you know this Bent Spoon Award, the award no one wants to win, has been going for 40 years now? Oh yeah, you should see some of the winners. In fact, you can see some of the winners. Let me tell you about some of them. In 1984, the award went to the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works. I know we're all big fans of them. For their payment of $1,823 to US psychic archaeologist Karen Hunt to use divining rods to detect an alleged electromagnetic photo field. Fantastic. Well deserved of the award, that one. Look, I could have done that for $15 in cab fare. In 2000, it went to Jasmuheen, who claimed she could live without food and water. Anyone who's been to uni can do that. In 2015 and 2020, it was former celebrity chef Pete Evans. Former celebrity chef Pete Evans. That means he's no longer famous for being a chef, he's just famous for chefing? Anyway, he won it for just being Pete Evans. Good on you, Pete. You keep doing that. We're all right behind you. A long way behind you. Also, winners over the years have been a slew of anti-vaxxers, quacks and shonks, and even a free energy machine. I could use one of these. Well, I have actually got one. It's not actually just some stuff in the corner. In this 2021, the Australian Skeptics are looking for the next winner/loser of the Bent Spoon. And that's where you come in, although not here, my door's locked. Come in, yes, if you live in Australia, send in your nomination for the Bent Spoon 2021 via that link at skeptics.com.au. Who should you nominate? I'm not going to say. Who should you nominate? As the skeptics say, it should be a perpetrator of the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudo-scientific piffle. That doesn't quite work. It should be the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudo-scientific piffle. But hurry, nominations close soon. Act now. Get a part in Macbeth. Oh, no, hang on, that's a different script. But hurry, nominations close soon. Hey, you think the bent spoon's bad? Wait till you see the bent fork. Oh, come on, it's a pandemic. Time for another cocktail, Dieter. I might use a bendy straw this time, and not in the cocktail. Hey, Dieter, pass me some of that free energy. Did you know that Richard Saunders was in the movie Sweet Charity? No, neither did he.
Now it's time to look through those digital archives of newspapers from around the world this week. But also, we're going to be using little clips and snippets from videos on YouTube. And the topic? Jack the Ripper, Part 2. Last week we were looking at older reports of Jack the Ripper and the paranormal when it came to one person in particular. That was Robert Lees, who claimed he was able to detect the presence of Jack the Ripper on a bus. And the more I researched Mr. Lees, the more I found. There's quite a lot of references to him over a century ago. But this week I thought we'd come forward in time. We would look at more recent bits and pieces regarding Jack the Ripper, and I thought YouTube might be an interesting place to have a look. Jack the Ripper and the paranormal, of course. And there are many reports, stories, videos on YouTube about Jack the Ripper and ghosts and the paranormal, psychics and things like that. And I have put together a short collection of 4 to look at. 2 of these excerpts involve something called a ghost box or a spirit box. Now, we've covered these things before on the Skeptic Zone over the years. I've seen one in use myself. This is more or less, it's a handheld radio scanner, which has been designed to quickly flip between frequencies. And if it locks onto a broadcast, it will stay there for a fraction of a second or a second and then move on to the next frequency and find another active broadcast, which can result in lots of static, of course, but every now and then fragments or whole words. And the adherents, the believers, think these words are actually the voices of spirits using radio, and why not, to send messages to the living. Here is an example of one I recorded myself on a ghost tour some years ago here in Sydney. Now, according to one website here, what is this one? Ghoststop.com. Or is it ghoststop.com? One or the other. They present no end of ghost hunting equipment, including ghost boxes. Oh, they also have the Boo Bear, or the Boo Buddy, which is a bear with a camera in it, I think. That's a bit creepy in itself. One of their featured items is the S-Box Ghost Scanner Plus Recorder. The S-Box Ghost Scanner is a spirit box radio frequency sweep scanner and recorder for paranormal research. S-Box includes many other features to aid in making your investigations easier while providing quality evidence documentation. And it features automatic FM/AM radio sweep plus spike detect, record and playback radio sweep, and EVP audio. And EVP stands for Electronic Voice Phenomenon. Adjustable sweep, speed control, rechargeable battery, and long life. Well, that's good. I mean, you would hope at least the ghosts would be environmentally aware. SD card port for recording, 32 gigabyte maximum. Forward or reverse sweep direction, loud amplified speaker, 10 times power, and headphone port. Backlit display and built-in flashlight. You might scare the ghost with that, but anyway. Bluetooth connection for use as a wireless speaker. S-Box is a new spirit box built specifically for paranormal investigations with features we need. It's a compact and easy-to-use tool for communication with paranormal entities. S-Box utilizes radio frequency sweeps to generate white noise from existing FM and AM bands, which theory suggests may provide an entity the energy they need to be heard. When this occurs, you may hear voices or sounds coming through the static in their attempt to communicate. Now, what skeptics have long suspected is really going on here is a phenomenon called audio pareidolia. Now, pareidolia is the human ability to make sense out of random images, primarily. In other words, we can see a face in a cloud, or a dog in a cloud, or anything in the shapes of clouds, or the shapes of anything else. Usually these are faces. We can see faces in all sorts of everyday objects, but that's just the way our brain works. Well, audio pareidolia is somewhat similar when we can hear random noises or static or something like that. And our brains will seek patterns, seek words if possible. Sometimes you hear music where there's no music. But in the case of the spirit box, it's putting these fragments of words together and imagining that they're making some sense somehow, or saying actual sentences. But just harking back to the visual pareidolia, one of the classic examples, of course, is the face on Mars from many years ago, when the NASA picture of a small hill on Mars convinced many there was a giant face carved on the planet. But I digress. Getting back to spirit boxes and our examples from YouTube. Our first example comes from Celebrity Ghost Chat with Roxanne. And here she uses a ghost box to contact the spirit of Catherine Eddowes, one of the victims of Jack the Ripper.
Helen, you have 3 children. Are you with your children? Your parents, George and Catherine, are you with them now? Catherine, can you tell us anything? Can you tell us anything about your murderer? The man who murdered you. Do you know anything about him?
It's interesting to note that also on her video, before she gets to the ghost box or the spirit box, she says that no negative comments or skeptics or trolls will be tolerated. Oh well. Our next clip comes from a show, it looks like a pilot possibly for a TV show, I'm not sure, called Contact Killer, Rapid Response Team, and this appears to be something from the Sci-Fi Channel from 2016. And this shows a group of young people running around in the dark with infrared light, of course, which turns out to be green when you see it on the screen. And they are talking to the air, but looking at a little electric meter on the floor with a little dial that sort of responds.
Annie, is the person who murdered you here at the Princess Alice? What happened, Annie? Come talk to me for a little bit. If you could come as close as possible to this device on the ground and let me know you're here. Oh, that's amazing. That's perfect. Whoa. Is that you, Annie?
Now, this clip was filmed, of course, in the dark. And again, I asked the question, why don't they just film it in broad daylight, or at least with good lights, so they can see what they're doing? The answer is, of course, that doesn't make for good TV. And what the TV want are creepy situations. Next, we have The Psychic Examiners from 2019. And I can see this video hasn't exactly had many views.
I get a very strong sense that he really does like to play with his victims. His breath is warm and it's coming out in puffs of mist. He appears to be clean-shaven except for possibly a mustache. And his hair appears dark. Now, I'm trying to get a feel for his skin tone. And I want to say it's light-colored. I want to say it's white, but not distinctly. I would say a lighter color, possibly tan from the summer months that is faded, or even a different colored complexion. He has on a dark coat and a dark hat, which is covering most of the top of his face, because his face appears to me in a shadow except for the bottom half. His hands look immaculate, like his nails are trimmed. They do not look like a hard-working man.
And finally, slightly unusually, we have Contacting the Ripper's Ghost. Haunted places in Melbourne. And this is from 2019.
Probably in the darkest, creepiest part of this alley, and we're going to try and reach out to the resident ghost here, who is believed to be Frederick Bailey Deeming, Jack the Ripper suspect. And I'm going to be using my spirit box. I'm not sure we'll get any responses, but I mean, it's worth trying. We're here, and this place has an interesting dark history and quite a few ghost sightings, so definitely worth trying. Hi, my name is Amy. I'm looking to talk to anyone who might exist in this alleyway. Specifically, I want to talk to Frederick. Frederick, are you around? Can you come close to me and say hello? Why are you in this alley? Why did you come to Melbourne?
So once again, the spirit box was in use. And, well, who knows? Maybe the ghost of Jack the Ripper took a trip to Melbourne. But that's enough from YouTube. Let's now move on to other reports. And that brings us to the newspaper clipping for this segment, and this comes to us from the Amarillo Globe News, the travel section, dated Sunday the 19th of November 2006. A chilling London tour. Hang out with Jack the Ripper by Rosemary McClure from the Los Angeles Times. London. The cobblestoned street is dark and slick from rain. The clouds are heavy and low, but the light spills from the 10 Bells pub. Inside, lagers and ales are poured, and a dozen patrons are drinking, laughing, and lounging at the Darkwood Bar. More than 100 years ago, during what came to be known as the Autumn of Terror, serial killer Jack the Ripper stalked this small pub in London's East End. 2 of his victims were thought to have walked out its door. Today, the pub has become the centrepiece of one of London's most popular walking tours, the Jack the Ripper Walk. "I've tried to figure out why the tour is so popular," said author and guide Richard Jones, who leads nightly walks through the area where the 19th century Ripper murders occurred. "It's a very sordid story. 5 women brutally murdered," Jones said. "You know what's really strange? The majority of people who take the tour are women." Jack the Ripper's gruesome offences would qualify him for membership in any hall of infamy, even in London, a city with more than its share of grisly crimes and haunted locations. With its long history of murder, mayhem, and macabre incidents, London has the daunting distinction of being the most haunted capital city in the world. I explored the city's sinister streets one night last spring on a haunted London tour, with London's dark, narrow streets and ancient alleyways as a backdrop. It didn't take much imagination to hear ghosts wailing in the wind, see headless soldiers in the shadows, and feel a chill down my spine when I heard tales of haunted palaces, theatres, prisons, and cathedrals. The tour piqued my interest in the city's colourful history, so I made a few calls. London has its share of skeptics who appear on TV and the lecture circuit, debunking paranormal activity and disparaging those who believe in ghosts, goblins, and things that go bump in the night. But for every skeptic, there's a true believer, and such organizations as the Institute of Paranormal Research help further the stories. The Institute in London investigates UFOs, occult activity, and ghosts throughout Britain. Jones, who has written 11 guidebooks, his latest, The Jack the Ripper Tour, will be published next year, is popular on the TV lecture circuit too. "Jack the Ripper bought my house," he said. He guides tours 5 nights a week, introducing thousands to the sordid crimes of Jack the Ripper. "It's hugely competitive," Jones said. "More than 1 million people take the tours each year. On any one night you can count 20 to 30 groups going out." On one tour, we started at dusk in Suffolk, across the Thames River from the City of London. The area boasts the resurrected Shakespeare Globe Theatre, which opened in 1997. But for the most part, the streets and buildings are old, historic and creepy, especially at night. At Clink Street, walked beneath the model of a gibbet and a decomposing body. Unfamiliar with gibbets? It's a gallows with a crossbeam. Criminals were hung from it in chains and their bodies were left to decompose. Our final stop was in the East End, site of the Ripper's 5 murders. Some of the women haunt the area, our guide said. I wondered why Jack the Ripper's crimes had become so well known. Jones' theory? Jack the Ripper was the first mass media killer. His murders were reported by newspapers around the world. For 10 weeks in 1888, terror reigned, wrought by the knife of Jack the Ripper. So there was a more recent example of Jack the Ripper and the paranormal reported in the newspapers, this time from the USA. Maybe one day when this pandemic is over, I too can join a walking tour of London and search for the ghosts of the victims of Jack the Ripper. Maybe I won't be using a spirit box. They tend to be a little bit noisy and distracting, I think. But no matter where you are in the world, you can dive into your local archives of newspapers and information, digitally stored online for your research and entertainment. And don't forget, you can always use the Australian one at trove.nla.gov.au. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and thank you to all my special guests this week, in fact. All the people who appeared on the show, Pasquale and Michelle and the gang from the Great Australian Prediction Project. Next week on the show, we have a special report by our reporter Adrian Hill in Canada about a woo shop in the tourist spot of Jasper. Jasper, famous for its mountainous views. In fact, I was in Jasper over 50 years ago. I'm told it's very beautiful, but I really don't remember. And hello to all the people listening in Canada. One day I will return. Yes, I will return. One day. Thank you to those people in Canada and everywhere else who continue to support the Skeptic Zone by visiting skepticzone.tv and clicking the Patreon or PayPal link. Your weekly contributions means the show keeps going. And this has been the case for many years now. If it wasn't for you lovely people in Canada and everywhere else, then there would be no Skeptic Zone. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from the never-ending lockdown, Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.